Hello!
Hi!
We're back again with part 4 of our Exploring the Adoption Journey video series. And we are going to be talking today about being in between two worlds. And I think being international and transnational adoptees, it just makes us automatically be a part of two worlds in many ways. But I think today we're just going to focus mostly on talking about developing worlds versus underdeveloped worlds, or developing or third world countries. However you want to put that label on differentiating these different areas. That's what we're going to be talking about and our experiences with that between where we grew up, which I grew up in the United States and Milagros grew up in England, and then where we were both born, which is in Peru.
Definitely. So I was born in London. I was born in Adoptee. What am I saying? I feel like I'm born and bred in London, but I'm not.
Yeah, isn't that weird? It's a weird feeling.
Yeah. Well, I know. I don't know. But anyway, so I was brought up in London. I came when I was 15 months old, more or less. I think the first time I heard developed or third world or developing or whatever those nations, I can't remember which terminology I heard first.
Yeah.
I think it was when I heard my mum talk to me about Peru itself. So I don't remember how old I was. It could have been any age between 3 and 7, really. Right. She kind of described it, not in a bad way, but just kind of giving us an idea about Peru in itself, like it's a developing country that had problems, and that, perhaps because at that time we didn't know why I was abandoned. So we were my mum was like, well, but it could have been this reason, it could be that reason, but it's probably more to do with poverty than anything else. That's why I was abandoned. So the whole notion of Peru equals poverty equals abandonment was sort of kind of like introduced to me at a very young age.
That's an interesting way to connect those things. I never really kind of thought about it like that. But yeah, that's definitely true.
But also my parents lived in developing countries themselves. So, I mean, it wasn't just me that was born in a developing country. So that we always used to talk about the history and like the issues within their own countries, such as Argentina and Zimbabwe that's growing up. And then we just kind of included Peru at that stage.
Right.
So I think being aware of, not only being aware of Peru, but being aware of other countries that were kind of part of my own adoptive family's history. I understood how each kind of country had its own problems and had its own issues. And even like living in London has its issues.
Right.
So for example, my mum would say, because she spent a lot of time in America, she's comparing to America to London all the time. Oh my God, the plumbing here is rubbish. It's, so there's always issues wherever you live.
Right.
So the idea of comparing countries, or kind of like, oh my, you know what I mean? Kind of that whole thing was kind of in my household a lot. Because they used to live in many places. So
that's interesting.
They never used to say that, like, oh, the plumbing's rubbish, but that would just be one way of expressing something. Yeah. But I guess, the other way is, so to speak, like there's issues in Peru, so kind of identifying that for some reason doesn't mean that it's less it's beautiful or less, just because it's developing doesn't mean anything less than England or anything less in Peru. It's just that's the way that it is.
Right.
So that's how I was introduced to my world, sort of thing. And then from Arequipa, which is totally another issue, well, I heard lots of things growing up about Arequipa, that it was so beautiful. The people that made Peru came from Arequipa. Like, they produced really intelligent people from Arequipa reason. Or people who would, like, kind of shape kind of Peru, or have shaped Peru. I can't remember all of them, but, like, literary writers and all of these people. And then, so that's on the one hand how I was introduced to my birth city.
Right.
But I was well aware that I was also from the Sierra. So that's a whole kind of notion of developing, because I think if you look at the three landscapes, and they're kind of like how Peru is kind of like, everyone knows that Peru equals Incas, and Incas equals the Sierra kind of thing.
Right.
So it was again how I was introduced, that historically they had such amazing culture and it's such an amazing architecture and such an amazing handicrafts. The history of Peru was so rich. It was a balanced understanding that even though it was a developing nation, the history was so rich. You couldn't compare it to London in a sense. I mean, we couldn't build a city on top of a mountain. We couldn't do that. We don't have mountains here, but hey. But, you know, we couldn't have done that without, you know, without the wheel or something like that, you know. So all these magnificent feats that a developing nation built their city on, I mean, that's sort of like, wow, does it matter? They still managed to do that kind of thing. History. So I think my understanding of like developing wasn't so derogative. It was first kind of hearing the problems, like poverty, like education system not so good, a few issues with like racial structures and class structure. But apart from that, like, it's a beautiful country. Yeah, it's got great culture. So I think it was balanced and I think it was fair. I think that was important. I think it gave me a good introduction to start off with, let's put it that way. Obviously, my mum used to compare London to America all the time. Yeah. It used to be so funny. Yeah. So even if I went through that discussion, there'd always be like, you know, not every city is perfect. And not every country is perfect. Yeah. And even education systems are different. So what I'm trying to say is, like, I think growing up in my household, we just got a lot of information. I just had a lot of information, kind of like, like, these are my experiences in this country, in that culture, and kind of like understanding it.
Well, I think like the things that you were talking about earlier too, about having the adoption being connected to developing, I think that's definitely something that was a part of my story as well. Was like, well, people are poor there. That's why they can't keep their children, which is why, you know, you get kids to the United States, you know, to America, because like people in that country can't take care of their children because they're too poor. So I definitely knew that, or like that's what I knew, you know, to be true in my mind when I was growing up. And I think it's kind of interesting because if you think about it, you know, and I'm sure the same is true for England as well, that there's plenty of adoptions that take place in the United States as well. But it's just very looked at as extremely different when you're adopting from, you know, a first world country versus a third world country, you know, as we call them. So there's definitely that dynamic of kind of like more power and less power and just more than and less than. And at the same time, I think I also got some other views and understanding that the history was really beautiful. You know, like you said, the handicrafts are really beautiful. You know, strong people. And I think also the fact that I went to the culture camp when I was younger, that helped me feel a lot of pride in where I was from or where I was born, where my roots were. Because, I mean, partially to the counselors that we had at our camp, I mean, they were so proud to share their culture with us and so proud to share their stories and music and just lifestyles and values that I don't think I ever got too much from other Peruvians themselves saying like, oh, well, you know, Peru's going through a lot, or oh, there's, you know, a lot of stuff going on that's really bad there and the United States is better. You know, I don't think anyone ever said that, or I don't think I ever really got that message too strongly, but I was aware that there was like these economic disparities and I was kind of a product of that, you know, that I was, or I guess an outcome of that. I was kind of implicated into all of that. So, yeah, I mean, I think before I went back, I think I had like kind of like a romanticized poverty idea of it in my head, you know, like, you know, the mountains are beautiful, but the people are poor, but it's like a beautiful lifestyle. So like, hooray, you know? But I think the first time that I went back, and definitely, like you said, comparing the city and comparing the Sierra is extremely different, and the people are different.
Yeah, I totally agree with when you said romantic poverty, because, I mean, how much would you tell a child about poverty equals suffering? I mean, how much would you actually get into that? I mean, do you want that child to feel, like, depressed all their lives? I mean, no, but I'm just thinking about, my parents should have said poverty equals suffering, but it does, for a lot of people, equal suffering. Yeah. And certainly, I think, when we were adopted at those times, I think, now that we know what we know, looking back now, obviously our families had it really rough, and I don't think they were just living in idyllic situations. I think there was a lot of suffering, and I think when I found out the truth, I was really, like, shaken.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, they really suffered.
Yeah.
And here I was in London,
Right.
thinking. Well, I wasn't thinking because I had no something. I wasn't thinking. Well, I didn't know who my family was, so it was just a question mark. Thinking, well, there must be out there somewhere. So I hadn't really any relative thoughts to actually make it kind of go through that process. But like when I realised, oh my God, I was having a right good time in London all these years, like, going to nice schools and going and seeing around the world, going back to Peru, I don't know how many countless times, having a good education system, having a nice family,
right,
and having access to these things. And meanwhile, back home, things weren't so bright.
Back in the mountains.
Back there, things weren't great.
No,
things
yeah.
Peruvians. No. I mean, you'd have to be in the mountains to have suffering. Things were really bad in the 90s, really bad.
Yeah.
And I do remember once hearing things were bad in the 90s, but no one really explained it to me. Like, I didn't get it. Because I do remember about that time when all that stuff was happening. Because I do remember saying to my mom, one time we were thinking about going or something, but the lady at the embassy said, no, it's not a good time to go. It's not a good time.
Oh, really?
Yes, because my mum was quite friendly with the embassy lady.
Huh.
Yeah, at that time, like, my mum, like, she was telling her all these, like, no, it's not a good time to go, it's not a good time to go. That's in the 90s, like, 92, 93, no, not a good time to go, and things, like, not great.
Right.
And yes, so I did hear certain things, but I never had a discussion about anything, and I guess there wasn't really anyone I could have a discussion with, really. Yeah. I mean, I could and I couldn't, but I didn't really have the vocabulary and I didn't really know what to think. Right. So anyways, I think now that we know what was going on, I think, for example, me, even though I was far away or far from knowledge about my family, like literally I didn't know anything, and yet obviously when I had my passport, I was born in Arequipa, but even though we might not have had, like, memories in our countries, so to speak, we're still part of the developing problems. This is what I'm trying to say. So even though we might not think that living in London or living wherever we're living, that we don't have links to our birth country, I think we're kind of deceiving ourselves to the fact.
Absolutely.
And I think that, I mean, I never thought that, so I never myself, I always had links. I always thought I always put my right hand out there just to make sure it was there. But you know what I mean? Like, I never kind of not assumed I wasn't part of that. I just, when I knew my story and I knew Peru, I kind of realised how much my history had an impact on the fact that I was born in a developing country and that my history is a developing, well, my history is sort of, whatever it is, sort of, well, being like my mum's sort of like first language Quechua. What I'm trying to say, I mean, like I'm kind of my mum's history is kind of Incan history, if I can call it that. I'm not really sure what the proper terminology is, but I can't really deceive myself. I mean, what I'm saying, no matter where you live or no matter where you grow up, you can't really think that you're so far from developing context.
Right.
I think knowing what I know now, I realise how much now my kind of life in Peru, that year and a bit, how much that sort of had an impact on things in London, even though I didn't know.
Right.
So it kind of was shocking to think, like, oh, here I was having a nice time with my friends, going out, doing all these lovely things, and not realising how much suffering was going on, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really sad, I mean.
You tend to feel, at least I think sometimes you feel kind of, like, guilty about it. About, like, why do I get to have all these, supposed luxuries? Why was I the one, and everyone else is having a really hard time?
Totally, and it's sort of kind of like, oh my goodness, what? Sort of like you don't know where to go, left or right.
Right.
And you don't know what to say. What can you say? Because obviously you want to say the right things, but at the same time, when you're part of that, you've got to be kind of sensitive to the fact of the circumstances that one's families kind of had to go through. And so, like, I remember thinking, not feeling sad, but I don't mean it like I was depressed or anything, but like thinking like being reflective kind of thing.
Yeah.
And thinking like how hard I had to work on my adoption, and it's sort of not easy because there is no kind of handbook to give you, and there is no sort of there was no kind of prior experiences in my kind of environment, so it was sort of like a hit and miss.
Yeah.
But no, thinking how much we had to kind of go through it all. And then you feel bad because you want to tell them all these things, but at the same time, you know that their situation was 100 times worse.
Right, totally.
Like, God, I gotta keep my mouth shut because...
It's, like, not that bad.
It's not that bad at the end of the day.
Right.
And I think, yeah, it kind of puts things into perspective. At least it kind of puts things into perspective.
It does, you know, speaking of the perspective, I mean, I think the first time that I went to go visit the country, and if I think back on my memories, and maybe when I was younger, I saw things differently, and I would have had different things to say at that point in my life as a 12-year-old. But when I remember back to being 12 and going to visit, I mean, I remember people begging, seeing people begging on the streets, and, like, remember, like, thinking that wasn't so common. You know, I lived in a nice neighborhood. I still live in a really nice neighborhood in my town. So I wasn't as exposed to that just like on a day-to-day basis unless we went to certain other areas. And other than that, I mean, I have positive memories, you know. I think I felt like that trip was just very, like, it was a tourist trip, you know. They keep you out of the areas where, you know, they don't want you to see, or, you know, you'll be scared or whatever. I mean, it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of systems in Peru that support, you know, production. Well, there's production in Peru that then, you know, gets shipped to the United States for really cheap. I mean, a lot of clothes are made there. In the United States, like you said, you can't unimplicate yourself, or you can't take yourself out of the equation of being a part of the developing world, because you're buying things from there. You know, you're in some way or another, you're kind of taking advantage of the country or the people. And then you go into the country as a tourist, and it's like the same thing, you know, you're just like shuttled around and like afforded all these luxuries, and you know, people are taken advantage of, and you know, I remember people always saying like they'll try and take advantage of you because they think you have resources, so be careful. And so it's just like, oh, these people are bad, you know, kind of a view, which is kind of bad in general attitude to have. But then I remember when I went back the second time, when I went back for a year to study and live, I got like a whole nother view of the country. You know, it wasn't like fluffy and pretty and cute. It was realities, you know, it's day-to-day life, and, you know, school and work, and, you know, going out and things, and, you know, birth family issues, and, you know, I got to see the city, not just the city, I got to see the mountains as well, and, like, kind of feel like what it was like to live there. And after having that experience for a year, and coming back to the United States and going back to New York City, and I think me and my mom had like found a hotel on like 34th Street or something, which is Murray Hill. It's like a gorgeous area of Manhattan, and having these beautiful like hotel beds, and like I just noticed everything so much more. I was just so hyper aware. Like, I'm in this huge bed. I'm like on the 10th floor of this gorgeous apartment building in one of the most richest areas in the city, in the country then. And then I went back to my college, and I was around a lot of other kids that grew up with that type of wealth. And even though I didn't, when I had left and come back, I just felt like so different. I felt like a different person. I had seen and like learned so much, and asked questions, and you know, had experiences with classism and just the like harsh realities of the world, you know. And I came back and I felt so out of place. And I think at that point I did get depressed, because I just felt like, what does this all mean? And like, why am I here? And, you know, why am I a part of this like crazy world that has no perspective, and like doesn't value things, and like doesn't value the earth, and like, you know, doesn't value people, and puts other like money and all these like material stuff over people. And I just felt so, it was just hard. I was having a really hard time with that, because it just became so much more clear to me after spending so much time there. And I definitely, I mean, it took me a while. It took me a long time to get readjusted. And again, what I did to kind of deal with it was just like study it. I just went into academic study and tried to like process all these experiences, and like process the things that I was seeing, and to try to better understand them and see what I could do to kind of be a part of changing it.
I think when you have such intense experiences, and we always have intense experiences, because I often think about it when, you know, all these people from around the world that live in our cities and they go back to the developing countries, do they really have these experiences that we do? Because I don't know, I mean, I don't know, I've never really asked about. I always felt like we have our unique experiences because they grew up with the knowledge what it was like. They knew their own, like, cultural, like, issues, and they were part of it. Even if you're born and brought up in America and you're Peruvian, you know what your family's like back home.
Yeah.
You just know all of that. But having grown up in our families was certainly, so having grown up in my family, I didn't really realise how things were in my family, and I think having to face the reality of that really...
It just makes you, like, recognize the privileges that you have and the privileges that your family has.
Yeah, definitely, and so it doesn't really make you a better person.
No.
But obviously, it kind of makes you want to do more things.
Yeah.
Yeah, just in terms of education, for example, let's just go with that kind of thing, like having opportunities to do the subjects that I wanted to do and having the time to do it in, you know, have that concentration or have that time where I can just concentrate on my studies, not having to work and study sort of thing.
Right.
You know, having, you know, being able to just dedicate myself to studies, because I don't think I could just worked and studied. I would have got a good degree. So just stuff like that, and I realised my own personality and stuff like that.
Right.
Gosh, wow, I don't know how they, you know, they have to really, 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 really work really, really hard. I mean, not only do they have to work hard, like, just to get their studies down, but they even have to address, well, how we're going to function in that country and how you're going to get a job, you know, how you're going to improve yourself. That's another whole issue. So there's so many things that they have to do. But, I mean, at the same time, we also have to do that here. So, I mean, things are getting really, really tough here. I mean, you know, things aren't easy as it is. So, you know, it's
kind of relative in a way.
Yeah, and this is a whole issue, isn't it? So, for example, I always say to people, like, I don't know, because the nations of Europe, again, need correcting, or the nations of America need correcting as well, because, I mean, not everyone comes from rich families, so, you know, I always felt like I have to say, I don't come from a rich family, you know, I don't come from a rich family, but you really have to say it to them, because if you don't say it to them, they kind of assume it.
Yeah.
So, I feel like I always have to I have to actually explain to them, like, you know, even though it's a developed country, you know,
there's also some class disparities there too.
Well, yeah, and life and expensive, and the cost of living in London is so high.
Yeah.
So I kind of have to sit down and say to them, look, this is how it works, and this is the benefits of living in London. These are the benefits of living in Peru.
Right.
These are not the so good benefits of living in Peru, but these are not so. You know, you have to kind of like, this is what I've been growing up with. You have to kind of explain it to them.
Yeah, I think that's another thing, too, I wanted to just comment and say was that, I mean, I definitely saw and understood things more. I think I got exposed to poverty in general when I went to this third world country, when I went to Peru. But when I came back to the United States, I think I had realized, like, my mind just was opened about this, you know, the current state of the world, I guess. And also just going back and knowing that there's so much poverty in the United States as well, just like I'm sure there is in England. I don't think that was something before I left the country and had my experiences that I didn't realize it was just as bad. You know, there's just as many bad problems, and, like, you know, and not like I thought my country was perfect, my adoptive country was perfect, the United States was perfect. But I think that you grow up getting taught, at least in, like, our society, I think you grow up getting taught, like, oh, we're the United States, like, we're this powerhouse, and, like, everything's great, and we need to go help the poor other countries out. They're like, oh, poor them, like, they just have it so bad, you know? And it's, like, almost trying to, like, make you ignore the realities that are happening in your own town, in your own neighborhood, you know? Especially if you're someone that's from an upper class or from privilege, you know, and you're not just right on the ground level experiencing it already, you know, which I wasn't. I wasn't someone that was, like, dealing with, I mean, I had a single parent family, but I wasn't, like, you know, we weren't impoverished. I mean, we did okay. I never felt like I was missing something, or I was lacking anything, or I wasn't getting fed. All my basic needs were met, and then some, you know.
Yeah.
But I know that people in my town didn't have the same experience as I did. But I think I didn't really realize that, like really fully get that until I left the country and I was exposed to it outside of the country. But it made me, again, reflect, like, there's some bad stuff going on in the United States as well, you know? And as much as as there's this lack of infrastructure and, you know, no roads and, like, horrible, you know, state of, like, the environment and cars and things like that, people are always talking about Peruvians that are going to swindle you, so be careful. Like, I know my other Peruvian friends would tell me that. Like, be careful if you're going to this area. Like, they're going to try and swindle you out there or whatever. There were so many wonderful people and good experience I had in the country. And, like, there's so many beautiful places. And it's not all just, like, an explosion of, like, dirt and, like, poor houses. You know, like, there's some really positive things, positive people more than anything else. And then there's areas of infrastructure and like, wealth and richness and privilege and lack of understanding, and, you know, racism and classism and everything there. It's almost like, I mean, everything is, like, the same in some senses, you know. It's like, why is it called, you know, developed or developed? Like, why do we have to differentiate ourselves in that way? Because, I mean, so many of the things I saw, I was like, this is the same stuff that's going on in the United States.
Well, it's the economy, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think because I kind of, like, you know, we were talking earlier about we're just kind of between these two worlds, and being an adoptee, like, it just comes up in so many different ways, not just in terms of developed and developing country issue, but I think now more than ever, I kind of have this attitude, and I don't know if it's, like, a typical thing for adoptee to feel, if this is, like, a general thing, or if it's just me as a person, but I feel now, like, I'm really comfortable anywhere, you know, because I've done so much work on myself, and, like I said, academically and professionally and personally and everything. It's just been exposed to different places, and I've had different experiences and met so many different people, and, you know, like, again, I've done so much work in regards to my birth story, my adoption story, my birth family. Had conversations and, like, dialogue about these topics that, you know, now I go to Peru and, like, it's not, I don't feel scared, or I don't feel like, you know, oh, it's so different or whatever. Like, I feel I'm a part of that, and I'm comfortable in the mountains, I'm comfortable in the city. And same thing here, you know, in Modesto, I live in one side of town and I work on another side of town. You know, and it's always important to recognize, you know, your experiences and where you come from. At the same time, I also feel, again, like, I feel somewhat of, like, a flexibility in between these, like, environments, you know. My roots which are really poor, and my upbringing, which was, had certain privileges, and, you know, I realized because of the privileges I was afforded, I am allowed to feel comfortable in these different areas, but it's just something, again, like I said, that I've had to do work on, you know, and I'm sure I'll continue to do work on and think about and assess and reflect and everything about where I've come from, and just, like, what it means in a larger context, not just me personally, but I think what I really see it as is just, like, it's a larger context type of thing, you know. It's something that's reflective of our society at large, you know.
Well, I get what you say, and I mean, I feel really comfortable in Peru, and I like the fact that I can go from London to Peru, or to even other Latin American countries. I feel comfortable with it. And I like finding out about people's lives. But I guess there's one thing that I see, like, the inequalities in Latin America, and I myself feel a bit like that's a thing that really kind of saddens me. So I mean, we have inequality here, but it's, in terms of me, for example, being part of it, I don't feel like I'm in an inequality world in London. I don't feel like that. But when I'm in Peru, for example, I feel even though I may not have been, even though I am not, I wasn't brought up in Peru, but when I go back, I can sense the inequality. And I think when I see the inequality in terms of education, or when I see access to education, or for the local people, and particularly people in the Sierra, because that's where I'm from, I feel really, like, I kind of, like, have a heavy heart, like, it kind of still like kind of pains me
Yeah.
kind of see this, and that's just one thing I kind of don't feel comfortable with, in a sense. Like, this is a part of the problems of the developing world in Peru, that not everyone has access to these things. And even just being recognised as a Peruvian, kind of like in this year, or just being acknowledged, sort of thing. Like, it's with other Peruvians. What I'm trying to say, when you're with a group of Peruvians who from the Sierra, and you feel like you could have had that life, or you would be in the same predicament, as what I'm trying to say. I feel that more now, sort of. I feel that more empathy. That's what I'm trying to say. I've kind of understood the sufferings a lot more.
It becomes more personal.
Because
of the fact that we're so tied to it. I think
Becomes
people
more
maybe imagine. I remember one of my friends when I was living there was like, I remember like being young and imagining, oh, what it would be like if I had this life, or what if it would be like if I had this life. But like, you almost had this life, you know? Like, she's like, she kind of got it when she was there. She was like,
history.
This is...
I mean,
yeah,
even you might not have
had
it. Siblings would have had it. So it's not really distant from you.
No,
it's really near from you. This is really like...
You can't ignore it. You can't be like, oh, it's not my problem.
You can't say, well, you know, it happens. It kind of comes, as you say, personal.
Yeah.
And I think it's a journey that continues, because if the more you go back, you don't know how life is going to change, or something. Like, for me, like, it's something that I'm really interested in. So it's something that I have really, like, I'd like to know more about it, and like to know. I just like to be more involved in certain things regarding that. So for me, it's a continuous journey in that respect.
Yeah.
To understand the issues involved in developing countries, and Peru.
Yeah.
So, yeah, closer to home than one thinks.
Yep, it definitely is. And I think, at least for me, it's been a driving force for a lot of the work that I get involved with, like you said, you know. It compels you, it kind of like impulses you to do things, you know.
Definitely, and I don't know, perhaps with the education we feel more confident to do this. I don't know what it is, but I think it's a good thing to have realised, and a good thing to work on.
Yeah, definitely. Another great conversation. Always happy to be talking with my dear friend Milagros.
We're becoming good, well, we already are good friends. We're becoming sisters.
Yes, we are. Absolutely. So next week we'll be back. It's our number 5 video series. Can't believe it. It's half over. Whoa! We're going to be talking about our connection with family, and specifically parentage. So definitely stay tuned for that conversation, because just like all the others, it's bound to be interesting.
Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed listening to our conversations, and we'll be back next week for another installment. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.